Hello Year 9, welcome to Lesson 8. This is about people and how they survive in the tropical forest. So we're going to learn about the methods of agriculture of indigenous tribes and Amazonian settlers, and to understand the impact that they have on the forest. Please write the date and title in your book, and let's just take a moment to see how much you've learnt so far. In the past 7 lessons, we've looked at the components of an ecosystem, how ecosystems respond to change, the main biomes of the world, the main characteristics of a tropical forest. We've looked at how plants adapt to the climate and soil in a tropical forest. And we've looked at the causes and impacts of deforestation. So for today's quick quiz, we're going to do one question for each lesson so far. Pause and write down your answers to this quiz. Here are the answers. Please pause again and check your answers, tick what you got right and make any corrections as you need to. 3, 2, 1, pause. Now on to today's topic about how people survive in the tropical forest. Now indigenous tribes hunt and gather in the forest, and they also farm small plots of land using a technique called shifting cultivation or slash and burn. And your teacher has given you a separate link so that you can watch this clip to learn how it's done. So pause this video now and watch the story of shifting cultivation, which is told by a gentleman from an indigenous tribe himself. Pause now and then come back. So I really enjoyed that clip, and I hope that you did too. In that clip, you will have seen that the traditional method of shifting cultivation is sustainable, and that means that it can be done without creating permanent damage to the forest. There's no doubt it does cause some damage to the forest in the short term, but if it's done in a small scale and then it's left for 20 or 30 years to recover, it can do. So I'd like you to put these statements in order to describe the process of shifting cultivation slash and burn. Write them in your book in the correct order, please. So you'll need to pause now to sort these out into the correct order. 3, 2, 1, pause. Here is the correct answer. Take a moment to check that you've got everything in the right order. Now the thing about this is that when the process is allowed to happen in full, it is a sustainable method for small groups of people. So if it's only the indigenous farmers doing this and they're allowed to move on between plots, then it's a sustainable way to farm the forest. However, the process is being interfered with because the indigenous farmers are being told that they have to stay in a certain place, and it's been extended to larger groups of people. So the green arrow shows that the cycle should continue through 1 to 9 and then back to 1 in a different place. Unfortunately though, with this government interference, it means that when the vegetation has been slashed, cut down and burnt, and the ashes dug into the soil, now that makes the soil quite fertile, but when the plants are harvested, then the whole point of the plants is that they're going to give food. So they are full of nutrients and they've taken the nutrients from the soil. If then we just replant some new seed, there is less nutrition in the soil each time it's done because there's been no process of regeneration of the forest. And this reminds me very much of something you learnt about in the very first lesson of this topic. Here it is in a small picture, and here it is larger. So this was the diagram I used to explain interdependence in any ecosystem, but we're going to be looking right now at tropical forests. So the problem is that the flora, the plants in the forest, essentially the trees, have been cut down. Now the trees were providing the soil with that all essential leaf litter layer. The leaf litter layer is where the nutrients are in the tropical forest. Now the animals will disperse away from the forest that's been cut down. So again, there is not going to be any organic matter put into the soil by the animals in the region where slash and burn has occurred. So we don't have the input of organic material from either plant or animal in those areas. But the climate is still having an impact. So the baking sun and the heavy rain and sometimes the heavy winds is also having an effect on the soil, but it's not being replenished by the plants and animals. I'd like you to copy and complete this sentence to explain why this style of farming does not work sustainably when people stay in the same place. And I've used that clip that you saw to make this short paragraph. So pause, copy and complete. Please check your answers. They're here highlighted in yellow. Now I do think it's a shame if some of these Indigenous people have to give up their way of life, and I know that this has happened a lot. This has happened a lot over many decades and even many hundreds of years. But who else lives in the Amazon forest apart from the Indigenous tribes? Well, there are at least 1 million people who've been given land to farm by the Brazilian government. This started in the 1970s, and the idea that the government had was at that time cities were growing and there were a lot of very, very poor people living in the cities of Brazil. So the Brazilian government had this idea that when they built the Trans-Amazonian Highway, they could build little towns along it, and they could give the poor people in the cities a small plot of land that they could farm. So they did that, and over the years it's become at least 1 million people who've moved, they've relocated from the city into the Amazon. Now these people were pretty much like you and me. They had no experience of farming in a tropical rainforest, and therefore it didn't always go very well. Now, slash and burn that we've already looked at, it is sustainable when it's a small number of people and we're allowed to move on so that the forest can recover. But in the past 50 years, there have been so many more people using this method, and most of them are sedentary, not nomadic farmers, meaning that the forest cannot recover. And I've put the meanings of sedentary and nomadic just there. All of these farmers, whether they are Indigenous tribal farmers or they are recent settlers, such as the man in the photograph, they're all subsistence farmers. They're only just making enough food to feed themselves and their families. They very, very rarely manage to make enough food to sell to others. And that's in stark contrast to the cattle, soybean and palm oil farmers who make large profits. They are commercial farmers. So we've seen all the different ways now in which deforestation is happening. We've seen the commercial farming of cattle, soybean and palm oil. We've seen mining, mainly of iron ore. We've seen infrastructure developments, particularly HEP stations. We've seen urban developments, logging, legal and illegal, and we've seen subsistence farmers who use slash and burn. All of these things contribute to deforestation. So now it's time for a practice question, and this is a question from a previous exam paper. The actual question is this: using the information and your own understanding, explain how deforestation can have economic impacts. And this is a 6-mark question. The question gives you this photograph and it gives you this information here. So it's done a lot of work for you, but don't start to answer it yet. My next slide helps you write your best answer. As it's a 6-mark question, and I modelled this a couple of lessons ago, then it's marked in levels. A level 1, a very basic answer, gets 1 to 2 marks if everything is correct. Level 2 is a clear answer for 3 to 4 marks, and level 3 is a detailed answer. That will be a fully detailed answer which completely answers the question. So, bearing that in mind, look at the question very carefully and see what it is really asking for. Using the information, that part means you must use the information that they've given you about Courageous Mine in order to get above level 1, and your own understanding. So you also need to bring in some detail, some facts and figures about something else. So you could use some figures about cattle farming, for instance. You could look back over your notes and bring something else into the answer. That's what you need to do if you want to get above level 2. And then the actual question is about explaining. So you've got to give reasons. In what way can it have an economic impact, and only economic impacts? If you talk about social or environmental impacts, you won't get any credit for that whatsoever. So you will probably want to pause and go back to the previous slide in order to write your answer to this question, and remember as much detail as you can and keep it nice and ordered. Use some place names wherever possible, and when you've finished, please send your answer to your teacher. So thank you very much again, Year 9. I hope that you've enjoyed this lesson. Certainly I've enjoyed seeing the work that's coming in so far. Thank you very much for now, and I'll see you next time.